My name is Tayo Oyedeji, and I'm the CEO of Overwood. Overwood is a financial service firm that exists primarily to democratize investments for Africans all over the continent. You see, the problem is that across Africa, way too often, safe, high-yield investments are only accessible to multimillionaires and people with a lot of resources. And so what Overwood has done is to use the power of technology to make safe, high-yield investments accessible to everybody, regardless of how much money they have. And so this training course that I'll be talking to you about is the financial freedom model. And as we go into it, I'll explain a bit more about what it means, how to think about financial freedom, and why I think it's accessible to each and every one of us. My name is Tayo Oyedeji again. I've had years of experience in financial services. And what we try to do is to use my knowledge and the ingenuity of our people to provide value to our customers and clients across multiple parts of Africa. Right now, we're still focused on Nigeria, but we envisage that within the next few years, we'll be in as many African countries as possible. So let me talk to you about financial freedom. I want you to think for a minute about what you would do if you could have access to $1 million. I remember asking a friend this question, and what he said was he would retire from his job and go on and become a preacher. I spoke to another friend about the same, I gave another friend the same question, and he said he will retire and just live the rest of his life on the beach and just relax and live his life the way he wants to. Another friend still said that he will resign from his job. Literally everybody will resign from their job and then go on and go back to school to learn to become a medical doctor. And so basically what they are saying is that their entire lives is geared towards meeting their financial needs. So financial freedom is just a different way of thinking about life, to divorce life's decisions from financial needs. And so how do you know you're financially free? Well, the first way is when you have passive income that can meet your needs. That means you don't need to work for money. Instead of working for money, your money works for you. So you can live where you want, you can work when you want, and you can do the things that you're really passionate about. Dave Ramsey actually puts it this way. He says financial freedom means that you get to make life's decisions without being overly stressed about its financial impact because you're prepared. So think about it. Every single one of these gentlemen that I spoke to is working, living in such a way that is determined by his financial status. And so finance determines everything else. But with financial freedom, you get to choose how your life will be because your life is different from your finances. Your finances happens regardless of what happens with life. And so let's just go on into the model and talk about what the model is about. Now, if you look at the model on your left, it's got 4 boundaries, and the boundaries are employment, assets, investment, and liability. And then there are intersections within those boundaries. The 4 intersections are the intersection between employment and liability, which is RESA, the intersection between employment and assets, which is builders, between assets and investments, which is freedom, and then between liability and investments, which is flashers. And I'll just walk us through this model and use it to help us think about a way to achieve financial freedom. Okay, so let's start with the boundaries. The first boundary obviously is employment. It is any income earning endeavor that requires our physical or psychological presence. So it's a job, a business, a trade, anything that you have to go to make money, anything you have to do to make money. I think the key word here is physical or psychological presence. Now, what that means, physical presence is you have to be there. Psychological presence means that you have to think about it. So for instance, we've got a bunch of investors that have invested at Overwood, and all they've done is they've done their due diligence. They've decided that they can trust us, and they've given us their money. And so what happens is every single day, they get a dividend on the money that they've given us. Now, that's not an employment, that's an investment because they don't have to physically come to Overwood's office, and they don't have to psychologically think about how to make money with the money that they've invested for us. So the money just works for them passively. That's employment. investments, I used a bit of investment to differentiate between what is employment and what investment is about. And so to a large extent, things like mutual funds, investment in a firm like Overwood, stock, bond, partnerships, just things that do not require your physical or psychological presence. Let me give an example that I think is very, very important. Many people think that their businesses are investments, when in the actual sense of it, those businesses are actually employments. So let me give a very good example. Let's say that you started a restaurant, right? And you have to be there to manage the restaurant, otherwise it wouldn't work well. Now, basically what you have is a second job, not an investment, because for the business to work well, it still requires your psychological or physical presence. And so if you take that concept and use it as a way to differentiate between whether you have a job or an investment, it's a good model. Now, liabilities are fund-depleting tangible or intangible entities. So anything that takes money away from you. Very often, I remember when I was working for a credit firm in the financial service industry, one of the things we used to call assets, we used to have a product we call asset leasing. So we'll lease you money, we'll give you money to buy an asset, quote unquote. And that means to buy a car, to buy a TV for your house, or to buy a bunch of things that you could actually physically own. But the truth is that a lot of those things were actually liabilities, because a car is mostly liability because it takes money away from you rather than giving you money. And so cars, luxuries, jewelries, and things like that are actually liabilities because they take money away from you rather than giving you money. Assets, on the other side, are fund increasing tangible or intangible entities, things that add financial value to its owner. So things like education, for instance, can give you significant financial value, cash, businesses, investments, and things like that. And so I want us to understand the 4 boundaries, because within those 4 boundaries are the intersections that would sort of help us understand how to walk towards financial freedom. Okay, so now we can move on and talk about the intersections. The first intersection that we'll talk about is the racers. You've all heard about the rat race. And so what happens with these guys is that at the intersection of employment and liabilities. So I remembered I've been here. I'm sure a lot of us have also been here at one point or the other in our lives. I finished my PhD in 2008 and went on to become an assistant professor at the University of Georgia. And I remembered it was an exciting time because I was earning about 4 times my stipend as a PhD student. So it seemed like I was making a lot of money relative to where I was coming from. So one of the first few things I did was to buy a really nice house, because now you're making a lot more money, so you should live big. We bought a nice house. My wife and I, we bought a couple of cars. We furnished the house. We just kept buying because we had friends that kept showing us that there were more things to buy and to get. And so we also just followed suit. And so until one day it occurred to us that I was making 4 times what I was 4 times my stipend as a graduate student. But at the end of each month, I had nothing left. It seemed like I was even borrowing to survive. And so what happened was my job was bringing in money, but I was purchasing liabilities instead of assets. And that's where most of us are. So what happens is at the end of each month, we spend everything we make. And so we don't have anything. So we're living from payday to payday. The people in this space basically have restricted income portfolios, and it comes primarily from employment, but they consume every single part of that income. It's not a good place to be. Flashers, also on the negative part of it, actually tend to have made a lot more money than the rat racers, because it exists at the intersection of liabilities and investments. And I'll give an example of a really good friend of mine. Now, this guy is one of the wealthiest people I know in the world, in the whole world, extremely wealthy guy. But he's also someone that is always looking for a way to make more money. He's always searching for the new deal, for the next big one. I need more. And one day I walked up to him, I said, oh, you have so much, you make so much money on a monthly basis, and it seems like you never have enough. You're always searching for more. And he said, well, that's because you don't have any clue about my expenses. That my expenses are so high that no matter what I make, I still have to make more. And I said, give me an example. What do you mean your expenses are so high? He said, let me give you just one simple one. My 3 kids are in a boarding school in England that cost about £35,000 a year. That's almost £100,000 a year on tuition alone. It's like, whoa, that's a lot of money. Why did you do that? He said, well, I feel like I can afford it. And so basically, this guy is making so much money from his investments and the things he does and the things he has, but he's also spending so much that he just never seems to have anything left at the end of the month. And so the question I keep asking people is, it's never about what you make. It never really is about what you make. It's always about what you keep at the end of the month, at the end of the year. So wealth has nothing to do with what you're making. Wealth is all about what you're keeping. Let me say that again, because I think it's extremely important. Wealth is not about what you make or how much you make. It's all about how much of what you make you're able to keep. And so some people, like we showed earlier, are rat racers. They don't make a lot, but they're still purchasing liabilities. Others are flashers. They're making a lot, but they are still purchasing liabilities. Those 2 places are places that you don't want to be. So instead, let me talk about builders. It's a really good place to start. Builders also have restricted income portfolio, and their income is primarily from employment. But they have started building assets, primarily in cash and other businesses that will sort of help them make more rather than take away money from them. And so I remembered a couple of years later, I left academia and moved into the private sector. And then I began to make a little more money. And one of the things that I had learned between the time that I was a racer and a builder was that when you make more money, you don't inflate your lifestyle to meet the money that you're making, right? So I keep telling people that when you get a salary increase, what you should try to do is to live on your previous salary and save every bit of the increase you're making from your new salary. And so that was what I did. I began to save about 40 to 50% of my salary and began to invest it in different models that would ensure that the money comes back with children. That's the way I like to put it. When you invest, your money goes out and then it comes back with children, which is more money, which is more investments for you as a person. And so as a builder, back in those days, as I was saying, right, you make a lot more, or you don't make a lot, but you've restricted your expenses in such a way that it's not everything you make that you spend. And that frees you to get money to put into assets. Now, assets in this case are things like other businesses or investments in a firm like Overwood, or other things that would ensure that you at least have a little more than what you're making. And then the place to be actually is a place where your investments now make enough for you to be able to leave your job and to live on your investment plus assets. That's the place of freedom. And so if you keep building, well, so basically you're not a racer, you're not a flasher. If you continue as a builder, what would happen is eventually your investments will grow so much that you'll be able to live off it. So the financial freedom model basically says that we move away from racing, from flashing, and then we build and attain freedom so that we can walk away before we're 60, 70. Why is this important? Let me just tell you one more reason why this is important. Now, there's nothing wrong with retiring at 60 or 70 or whatever age a lot of us will be able to retire unless we change our mindsets. But by the time we're 65, 70, it's really tough to enjoy the fruit of the labor that we've worked so hard for. It's tougher to do some things. What if instead of doing that, we're able to build investments and assets that make it easy to retire by 50 or 55? What if you're able to go on and, like my friend, leave your consulting job and become a pastor because that's really what you've always wanted to be? What if you're able to leave your consulting job or whatever else you do to make money to go on and, like the other guy said, go back to medical school because that's what you always wanted, but it just never worked out. And so the path of financial freedom gives you a way to think about moving away from the life of school, work, retire at 70, and just wait to see what life throws at you. And so putting it all together, here's what I'll say. I'll say that if you're employed, keep building, don't race. Leave other people to pack on those liabilities. Get a used car that's in a good shape, for instance. Instead of investing all the cash you have into buying a new iPhone or whatever phone is more expensive, buy a basic phone and then invest the balance. And then what then begins to happen is as you begin to do those investments, the funds begin to grow and grow until it gets you to the place where you can actually walk away from the job you're doing because your passive income is enough to meet your need. Now, a lot of us don't do this math. We don't think about it very, very deeply. A friend of mine walked up to me and said, Tayo, I want to understand how this works. I like the way you live your life. And I'd just like to understand how the things you're talking about, how it works and how you've been able to attain it and what it means and all that stuff. So I told him, I said, what's your largest expense? And he says, well, it's our summer trip to England every summer. Myself, my wife, and our 2 kids go to England just once a year for vacation. I said, well, why is that important? He said, well, it exposes the children, it blah, blah, blah. It gave me a lot of reasons. I said, how much do you spend? I said, well, we spend about 2 million naira to do that. 2 million naira is about plus or minus $5,000. Yeah. And then I said, okay, so why do you need to do that? Okay. Apart from that, how much do you need to live on a monthly basis? He said, well, I need about 500,000 naira, plus or minus $1,200. I said, so if that's what you need, now let's do the math. And that's what I'll show you right here, the math, how it works. So let's say instead of 500,000, you needed 300,000 naira. If you multiply that by 12, it takes you to 3.6 million naira, right? And so I said, what kind of percentage can you get on an investment, a passive investment model like at Overwood? At Overwood, you get about 10% plus or minus a year. I said, well, we're going to do 10%. I said, well, at 10% per annum, do you know that if you're able to save 36 million naira, what that means is that you don't have to work again for the rest of your life? Because the 36 million naira that you've saved is going to give you about 3.6 million a year, which is about 300,000 naira, which then can cover your needs every single day of your life. And so the assignment I'm going to give everybody here today is simple. What's your number? How much do you need on a monthly basis? How much do you need on an annual basis? What kinds of return can you get on the investments that you can do in your market? And then finally, how much do you need to be able to walk away from financial models that tie you to a job or tie you to a location or tie you to things that you don't want to do? And I think that's the most important part of this. Understand that it's not too far. Until we do the math, we don't know how close we are to doing it. Thank you very much for listening to me. My name is Tayo Edeji, and Overwood is at www.overwood.ng. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.